A 17-year-old's dream of a lifetime was about to be shattered in the sterile, bustling halls of John F. Kennedy International Airport. He was on his way to a scholarship interview that would define his future. But a sudden commotion, a missing diamond bracelet, and the pointed finger of a decorated security officer changed everything. Accused of a felony with his future hanging by a thread, Milan Johnson had only his word against the system. But he noticed one tiny detail. Everyone else missed a flicker of light and a guilty movement that would expose a lie so profound it would bring a corrupt man to his knees. What the security cameras revealed next wasn't just proof of his innocence. It was the beginning of a spectacular downfall that no one saw coming. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 hummed with a unique kind of energy, a symphony of rolling suitcases, multilingual announcements, and the low thrum of human anxiety and anticipation. For 17-year-old Milan Johnson, it was the sound of his future beginning. Clutched in his hand was a single boarding pass for transatlantic air flight 88 to San Francisco. It wasn't a vacation, it was a pilgrimage. In less than 24 hours, he had an interview for the prestigious Chen Engineering Scholarship at Stanford University, a full ride, a golden ticket out of his walk-up apartment in Queens and into the life he had only ever dared to dream about. Milan was not a boy accustomed to grand things. His world was one of meticulous work of late nights, spent dismantling old radios to understand their guts, of sketching intricate blueprints for devices that existed only in his mind. He had his father's quiet intensity and his mother's observant eyes that were currently taking in every detail of the terminal. He watched a pilot stride by with an air of calm authority, a family wrangling 3 overexcited children, and a woman in a crisp Chanel suit talking animatedly on her phone, a cascade of diamonds glittering on her wrist. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, which contained little more than a change of clothes, a well-worn copy of The Art of Electronics, and the portfolio of his designs that had gotten him this far. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, a mix of excitement and imposter syndrome. Could he, Milan Johnson, really belong in the hallowed halls of Stanford? The security line was a slow-moving serpent of humanity. Milan put his backpack and his worn sneakers into a grey plastic bin. He took a moment to place his laptop in its own separate bin, handling it with the care of a surgeon. It was old and second-hand, but it contained his entire digital life's work. As he stepped forward, he found himself behind the woman in the Chanel suit. She was now off the phone, looking flustered as she juggled a designer handbag, a silk scarf, and her carry-on. "Everything with a battery larger than a cell phone in a separate bin, ma'am," a TSA agent called out in a monotone voice. The woman, who introduced herself to the agent as Mrs. Genevieve Dubois, let out an exasperated sigh and began to rummage through her handbag. Standing directly behind her was the man who would soon alter the course of Milan's life, Officer Farley Novak. Novak was a man built of solid, blocky lines, a square jaw, broad shoulders, and a chest that strained against the fabric of his dark blue uniform. He had the kind of weary, cynical eyes that seemed to have seen every trick and excuse in the book, and had long ago decided everyone was guilty of something. He surveyed the line of passengers not as people, but as a series of potential threats and annoyances. His gaze lingered on Milan for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else, a flicker of something cold and dismissive in his eyes before moving on. "Come on, people, let's keep it moving. This isn't a fashion show." Novak grumbled, his voice a low gravel that cut through the terminal's hum. Mrs. Dubois, flustered by his comment, hastily pulled out a tablet and a large power bank, placing them in a bin. In her haste, her hand caught the edge of her handbag and it tipped over. A tube of lipstick, a compact and a small leather key holder skittered across the floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, bending down to retrieve her things. Milan, without a second thought, knelt to help her, picking up the lipstick. "Here you go, ma'am." "Thank you, young man," she said, offering him a brief, distracted smile. Officer Novak stepped forward, his heavy boots making a firm, authoritative sound on the linoleum floor. "Let's clear the area. Move it along," he said, nudging one of her items with the toe of his boot. He made a show of helping her collect the last of her things, his large frame momentarily shielding her from Milan's view as he guided her toward the conveyor belt. Milan straightened up, pushed his own bins onto the belt, and walked through the metal detector. It beeped. Of course it did. He'd forgotten the cheap watch his dad had given him for his birthday. He took it off, placed it in the small bowl, and walked through again, this time successfully. On the other side, a scene of minor chaos was unfolding. Mrs. Dubois was frantically patting her wrists, her face a mask of growing panic. "My bracelet," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "My diamond bracelet. It's gone." Immediately the atmosphere shifted. The low hum of the terminal was replaced by a tense silence in their immediate vicinity. All eyes turned to the distressed woman. "It was a Cartier," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "A gift from my late husband. It was right here. I felt it just a moment ago." Officer Novak was by her side instantly, his demeanor transforming from bored cynicism to sharp-edged authority. "Nobody move," he commanded, his voice booming. "This is a secured area. Nothing leaves this checkpoint." He scanned the faces around him. He looked at the flustered businessman, the tired-looking mother, the college students in their hoodies. And then his eyes, cold and calculating, landed on Milan Johnson. He held Milan's gaze for a long, unnerving moment. In that instant, Milan felt a cold spike of dread, a primal sense of danger that had nothing to do with metal detectors or X-ray machines. He was just a kid on his way to an interview. But in Officer Farley Novak's eyes, he was already something else entirely. The world seemed to shrink around Milan. The ambient noise of the airport fading into a muffled roar. There was only the harsh fluorescent lighting, the accusing stare of Officer Farley Novak, and the frantic, tearful face of Mrs. Dubois. "Ma'am, where did you last see the bracelet?" Novak asked, his tone now deceptively calm, like a predator soothing its prey. "It was on my wrist," she sobbed, holding up her bare arm as if for evidence. "I felt it when I was on the phone. Then all my things fell, and that boy—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Her eyes darted towards Milan, and the implication hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Novak's head snapped towards Milan. It was a theatrical movement, designed for an audience. "You, the kid in the grey hoodie. You were right behind her. You helped her pick up her things." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "Yes, sir," Milan said, his voice quiet but steady. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "I picked up her lipstick for her." "Just the lipstick," Novak sneered, taking a step closer. He invaded Milan's personal space, forcing him to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. "You sure you didn't pick up something a little more sparkly?" A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers who were now rubbernecking with undisguised curiosity. Milan could feel their eyes on him, stripping him down, judging him. In a matter of seconds, he had been transformed from an anonymous traveler into a spectacle, a criminal. "No, sir. I just helped her. That's all." Milan insisted, his hands starting to feel clammy. He tried to keep his voice even, remembering his father's advice. Always be respectful, son, but never let them see you crumble. Empty your pockets, Novak commanded. Now! Humiliation washed over Milan in a hot wave. This was wrong. He hadn't done anything. But to refuse would only make him look guiltier. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out the contents of his pockets, his wallet containing $34, and a worn picture of his parents, his phone, a set of keys, and a crumpled tissue. He placed them in an empty grey bin. Novak poked through the meagre items with a pen, his lip curled in a contemptuous sneer. Nothing. Convenient. He then turned his attention to Milan's backpack, which had just emerged from the X-ray machine. I'll be searching this. He unzipped the main compartment and dumped its contents onto the stainless steel counter with a clatter. Milan's portfolio, his textbook, and his clothes spilled out in a messy pile. Novak rummaged through them with rough, uncaring hands, flipping through the pages of Milan's designs, smudging a detailed schematic with his thumb. A knot of anger tightened in Milan's stomach, but he bit his tongue, knowing any protest would be twisted against him. At the nearby transatlantic air gate B-24, the gate agent Sarah Jenkins watched the scene unfold with growing unease. Sarah was in her late 40s, with a no-nonsense demeanor honed by 2 decades of dealing with everything from lost passports to medical emergencies. She had a keen eye for human behavior, and something about the officer's laser-focused attention on the teenager felt off. She had seen Novak before. He had a reputation among the airline staff for being a bully, a man who clearly enjoyed the power his uniform gave him. She watched him manhandle the boy's belongings and saw the teenager flinch. It wasn't the flinch of guilt. It was the flinch of someone being violated. Back at the checkpoint, Novak finished his search of the backpack, having found nothing. But he was undeterred. The absence of evidence seemed only to fuel his conviction. A smart thief wouldn't keep it on him, Novak declared loudly to his fellow TSA agents, making sure Mrs. Dubois could hear. He probably passed it off or ditched it in a trash can. He turned back to Milan, his eyes glittering with triumph. But you were the one there. You had the opportunity. You fit the profile. Fit the profile. The words hit Milan like a punch to the gut. He knew exactly what that meant. He was a young black man in a hoodie in a place where he was an exception. In Novak's eyes, his very existence was probable cause. Sir, I have a scholarship interview in San Francisco. My flight is in 45 minutes. Milan pleaded, his voice cracking slightly despite his best efforts. I didn't do this. I promise you. Your flight is the least of your worries right now, son. Novak said the word son, dripping with condescension. He looked at Mrs. Dubois, whose initial panic had now hardened into certainty fueled by Novak's performance. He was so close to me, she said, nodding. It must have been him. Officer, please, you have to find it. We will, ma'am, Novak assured her. He then looked at his partner, a younger agent named Peterson, who looked deeply uncomfortable. Peterson, take the kid to interrogation room 2. I'll notify Port Authority police. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Farley, are you sure? Peterson murmured, glancing at Milan's pale, terrified face. We haven't checked the cameras or anything. I am sure, Novak snapped his authority, absolute. He was in the perfect position. It's an open and shut case of opportunism. Now do as I say. As Peterson hesitantly motioned for Milan to follow him, Milan felt his future slipping away, like sand through his fingers. The gate for Flight 88 was just 100 feet away, a gateway to a different Saturn life. Now it might as well have been on another planet. He was being led in the opposite direction, down a sterile white corridor under the suspicious glares of strangers. His dream was dissolving into a nightmare, all because of a lie born in the cold, cynical eyes of Officer Farley Novak. And as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup. Interrogation Room 2 was a small, windowless box designed to make people feel insignificant. The walls were a dull, institutional beige. The air was stale, with the faint scent of disinfectant, and the only furniture was a small metal table and 3 hard plastic chairs bolted to the floor. The room was cold, and a constant low hum from the ventilation system seemed to amplify the silence. For Milan, it felt like a kitouge. He sat in one of the chairs, his hands resting on the cold table. Agent Peterson stood awkwardly by the door, refusing to meet his eyes. Milan's mind was racing, replaying the last 10 minutes over and over again. The spilled handbag, the glint of diamonds, Novak's immediate, unshakable certainty. It didn't make sense. It was too fast, too clean. The door opened and Officer Novak strode in, followed by a woman in the crisp uniform of the Port Authority Police Department. She had captain's bars on her collar and a name tag that read Rostova. Captain Eva Rostova was a woman in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of professional calm. She assessed Milan with a neutral, unreadable expression. "This is him, Captain," Novak said, his voice filled with a self-satisfied importance. "Milan Johnson. Caught him right at the checkpoint. The victim, Genevieve Dubois, is positive he was the one close enough to snatch her bracelet during a distraction." Captain Rostova pulled up a chair and sat opposite Milan, placing a small digital recorder on the table. "I'm Captain Rostova, Mr. Johnson. I need to ask you a few questions. You understand you are not under arrest at this time, but you are being detained pending an investigation into a theft of property valued at over $50,000. $50,000. The number made Milan feel sick. That was more money than his family had ever seen in one place. "I understand," Milan said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I didn't steal anything." "That's what they all say." Novak scoffed from his position by the wall, arms crossed over his chest. "Officer Novak, I will conduct the interview," Rostova said, her tone sharp, not looking at him. She turned her attention back to Milan. "Tell me exactly what happened from your perspective." Milan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He recounted everything, his voice gaining a little strength as he focused on the facts. He described arriving at the airport, the long security line, Mrs. Dubois spilling her purse, and his simple act of picking up her lipstick. "I handed it right back to her," Milan finished. "That was it. The next thing I knew, her bracelet was gone, and he," Milan gestured towards Novak, "was accusing me." "You bumped into her, didn't you?" Novak interjected, ignoring Rostova's warning glance. "A little jostle, a classic pickpocket move. Create a diversion, and your hand is faster than the eye." "I didn't bump into her," Milan insisted, his frustration rising. "She dropped her things. I knelt down to help." "So your story is that you were just being a good Samaritan?" Novak asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I was just being a person." Milan shot back, his anger momentarily overriding his fear. "The way I was raised." Captain Rostova held up a hand. "Let's stick to the timeline. You knelt down. Officer Novak, where were you at this exact moment?" "I was right there," Novak said quickly. "I saw the whole thing. The kid was crouched down, his hands moving near her bag. It was suspicious from the start." Rostova made a note on a small pad. "And after you knelt down, Mr. Johnson, what did you do?" "I stood up and pushed my bins onto the belt," Milan said. "Then I went through the scanner." Milan's mind was a maelstrom, but one part of it, the analytical part that loved taking things apart to see how they worked, was desperately searching for a piece that didn't fit. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to visualize the scene. The grey floor, the black conveyor belt, the scattered contents of the purse. Mrs. Dubois, flustered. And Novak? Where was Novak? He was right there. Milan's memory supplied. He stepped in to help. Something clicked, a tiny, insignificant detail that he had barely registered at the time. "Wait," Milan said, his eyes snapping open. He leaned forward, his gaze locked on Captain Rostova's. "He's wrong. He wasn't just watching. He was there, too." He knelt down as well on her other side. Novak stiffened. "I was managing the situation, helping the passenger." "No," Milan said, shaking his head. "You were shielding her. Your body was between me and her when you were both on the ground. You told me to move it along while you were picking up her keychain." Rostova looked from Milan to Novak, her expression thoughtful. "Officer Novak, is that correct?" "I was helping an elderly passenger who was causing a delay. It's part of my job to facilitate movement through the checkpoint." Novak said, his voice tight. But Milan wasn't finished. The image was becoming clearer in his mind. "And there was something else. When you stood up just before you pointed at me, I saw something." "What did you see, Milan?" Rostova asked, her voice calm and encouraging. "A glint, by your hand, your right hand," Milan said, the memory solidifying. "You had your hand cupped near your belt by your radio. The lights overhead caught something. Just for a split second. A flash of metal and light. I thought it was your watch or something, but it was brighter. Like a diamond." A heavy silence descended on the room. Novak let out a short, barking laugh, but it sounded forced, brittle. "This is ridiculous, Captain. The kid is desperate. He's making up stories trying to deflect. A glint. He's accusing a federal officer based on a glint of light. He's probably seen too many movies." But Captain Rostova wasn't looking at Novak. She was looking at Milan. She saw the genuine conviction in his eyes, the frantic intelligence working behind them. He wasn't just denying, he was accusing. It was a bold, dangerous move for a teenager in his position. Most would be too terrified to do anything but profess their own innocence. "My flight," Milan said, the desperation returning to his voice. "It's boarding now. I'm going to miss it. Please, I'm telling you the truth. Just look at the security cameras. You have to have them." "We do," Rostova said softly. "Then look," Milan pleaded. "Zoom in. Watch his hands, not mine. I swear to you, I didn't do this." Novak took a step forward. "Captain, we have a distraught victim and a suspect with a flimsy story. We don't need to waste time reviewing hours of footage based on the fantasy of a cornered thief. I say we process him." Captain Rostova stood up, her decision made. She looked at Novak, her gaze cool and appraising. For the first time, a flicker of doubt had entered her professional calm. The boy's story was specific. Too specific for a simple lie. A glint by the officer's hand. That was a detail you either saw or you didn't. "No one is being processed yet, Officer Novak," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We're going to the monitoring room. Peterson, you stay with Mr. Johnson. Novak, you're with me. Let's go see what that glint was all about." As Novak followed her out of the room, his confident stride was gone. His shoulders were tense, and for a fleeting moment as the door closed, Milan saw the look on his face. It was no longer smug self-assurance. It was the barely concealed panic of a man whose perfect plan had just hit a fatal snag. The security monitoring room for Terminal 4 was a world away from the bright, chaotic public spaces. It was a dark, refrigerated cavern dominated by a wall of high-definition monitors displaying dozens of silent, sweeping views of the airport. The only sounds were the quiet hum of electronics and the soft clicking of a keyboard. Captain Rostova sat at the main console, a senior technician named Dave beside her. Officer Novak stood behind them, his arms crossed, trying to project an air of bored indifference. But a small muscle twitched in his jaw, and his eyes were fixed on the screens with an intensity that betrayed his anxiety. "Okay, Dave, bring up checkpoint Bravo camera 3A and 4C. Timestamp 1342, Rostova commanded. Two large screens at the center of the wall flickered to life, showing the security checkpoint from different angles. Camera 3A was a wide shot from above, showing the flow of people. Camera 4C was a tighter side-angle view. The footage was crystal clear. They watched the scene unfold in silence. There was Mrs. Dubois on her phone. There was Milan standing patiently behind her. And there was Officer Novak looming in the background. They saw the handbag tip over its contents, spilling. "Okay, pause it there," Rostova said. She pointed to the screen. "Zoom in on the floor area. Enhance sector G9. The image magnified, showing the lipstick and keychain on the floor. They saw Milan kneel down, his movements economical and precise. He picked up the lipstick, his hand clearly empty otherwise, and offered it to Mrs. Dubois. "Now, play it forward quarter speed," Rostova ordered. The silent drama continued. They saw Novak step forward, his large frame eclipsing Milan, for a moment from camera 4C's perspective. "Switch to 3A full screen," Rostova said. The overhead camera provided the crucial view. It showed everything. As Milan stood up and stepped back, Novak knelt down ostensibly to help. His left hand picked up the keychain, but it was his right hand that moved with serpentine speed. While all eyes were on the scattered items, his right hand darted towards the glittering Cartier bracelet that had fallen partially under the edge of the conveyor belt, hidden from most sightlines. It was a masterful piece of sleight of hand. He palmed the bracelet in a fluid, practiced motion, his body angled to shield the action from everyone at ground level. "There," Rostova whispered, leaning closer to the screen. "Freeze it." Dave froze the frame at the exact moment Novak's fingers closed around the bracelet. "My God," Dave breathed. Novak said nothing. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, pallid grey. The image on the screen was undeniable, a perfect, high-resolution portrait of his crime. "Play it," Rostova commanded, her voice hard as steel. They watched as Novak stood up. As he did, he brought his right hand up near his belt. His fingers curled into a fist. And then, just as Milan had described the harsh overhead lights, caught the facets of the diamonds squeezed within his palm, it produced a brilliant star-like flash, a glint of light that lasted for less than a second. The unblinking eye of the camera had captured it perfectly. The final damning sequence played out. Novak, with the multi-thousand-dollar bracelet now concealed in his hand, straightened his uniform, turned, and pointed his finger directly at the innocent teenager whose good deed he had used as cover. Rostova swiveled in her chair and stared at Novak. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were cold, sharp, and heavy with the weight of his betrayal. "You want to tell me about the glint now, Officer Novak?" Or should we talk about how you fit the profile of a degenerate thief who uses his badge as a shield? Novak opened his mouth, but no sound came out. A sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. The tough authoritarian bully had vanished, replaced by a cornered, pathetic man. He looked at the screen at his own guilty face, frozen in time, and knew it was over. It's a misunderstanding, he stammered, the words sounding hollow and absurd even to his own ears. The only misunderstanding at home, Rostova said, standing up to her full height, was my belief that you were a man of integrity. Dave, save this footage, all angles. Make 3 copies and secure them as evidence. Officer Novak, you will place your hands behind your back. As Rostova produced a pair of handcuffs, the door to the monitoring room opened. It was Sarah Jenkins, the gate agent from Transatlantic Air. She had seen Milan being led away, and her instincts had screamed that something was wrong. She had called airport security operations, insisting that she had information about the incident at Checkpoint Bravo, and demanding to speak to the supervising officer. She had been directed here. She took in the scene at a glance, the damning footage on the screen. Rostova holding the handcuffs and Novak's ashen face. "Captain Rostova," Sarah asked, "I'm Sarah Jenkins, the gate agent for Flight 88. I came because that officer Novak, I saw him, just after the commotion started. He was watching that boy with a strange kind of intensity before anything even happened. It was predatory. It wasn't right. And I'm willing to give a formal statement to that effect." Her words were the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just the video evidence now. It was a credible witness testifying to his suspicious behavior before the accusation was even made. It spoke to premeditation. Rostova nodded curtly at Sarah. "Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Your statement will be very helpful." She then turned back to the disgraced officer. "Farley Novak, you are under arrest for grand larceny, perjury, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs, locking around Novak's wrists, echoed in the silent, dark room. It was the sound of a career ending, of a life imploding, of justice unexpected and swift finally being served. Outside the room, Milan Johnson was still waiting, unaware that the silent testimony of a camera had just saved his future. The door to the interrogation room opened. Milan looked up, expecting to see Novak's smug face, ready to deliver another round of accusations. Instead, Captain Rostova entered alone. Her expression was entirely different. Now the professional neutrality was gone, replaced by a look of profound gravity and something akin to apology. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice formal, but her tone softened. "You are free to go. There has been a grievous error." Milan stared at her, the words not quite registering. "Free to go." The cameras showed us exactly what happened," Rostova confirmed. "They showed you acting as a good Samaritan, and they showed Officer Novak stealing the bracelet and attempting to frame you for his crime." A wave of relief, so powerful it left him lightheaded, washed over Milan. He felt his entire body sag, the tension that had held him rigid for the past hour, draining away in an instant. He had been telling the truth. He had been heard. "He's been arrested," Rostova continued, "and on behalf of the Port Authority Police Department and Farley, every law enforcement officer who tries to do their job with honor, I want to offer you my deepest and most sincere apologies for what you have just endured." "Thank you," Milan managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "But apologies aren't enough," Rostova said, her expression hardening again. "Damage has been done." She looked at her watch. "Your flight has departed. The relief Milan felt was immediately tempered by a fresh wave of panic. "My interview. It's tomorrow morning. I have to get there." "And you will," a new voice said from the doorway. It was Sarah Jenkins, the gate agent. She stepped into the room, a warm, reassuring smile on her face. "I've already spoken to my supervisor at Transatlantic Air. They are mortified, to say the least. An incident like this involving one of our passengers and airport security is a PR nightmare for them. They're also incredibly impressed with you, Mr. Johnson." She walked over to the table. "While Captain Rostova was setting things right, I was on the phone. Transatlantic Air has a private charter jet on standby for corporate emergencies. It's currently being fueled. They are flying you to San Francisco personally. You'll be wheels up within the hour." Milan's jaw dropped. A private jet. It was a turn of events so surreal, so beyond the realm of his imagination, that he could only stare at her in disbelief. The procession back through the terminal was a stark contrast to his earlier walk of shame. He was now flanked by Captain Rostova and Sarah Jenkins, who treated him not as a suspect, but as a dignitary. As they passed the security checkpoint, he saw the aftermath of the drama. Mrs. Dubois was there, speaking with another officer. Her diamond bracelet was back on her wrist. When she saw Milan, her face crumpled with shame and regret. She rushed over to him. "Oh, you poor boy," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I was frightened, and that monster. He convinced me. Can you ever forgive me?" "It's okay, ma'am," Milan said, his natural empathy overriding any lingering resentment. "You were just scared." His grace seemed to wound her more than any anger would have. She opened her designer handbag, the very cause of the whole ordeal, and pulled out a checkbook. "Please let me compensate you for your trouble, for the humiliation he put you through." Milan held up a hand. "No, thank you, Mrs. Dubois. I don't want any money. I just want to get to my interview." His simple, dignified refusal seemed to impress everyone present even more. Captain Rostova gave him a nod of deep respect. Sarah Jenkins led him away from the crowds towards a private lounge he never knew existed. "We also took the liberty of contacting the admissions office at Stanford," she said, a twinkle in her eye. "We gave them a brief, sanitized version of events, that you were unjustly detained at the airport due to a security error, and that the airline was rectifying it. The Dean of Engineering, a Dr. Alastair Finch, wants to meet you personally before your interview panel. He said he was impressed by your composure under extreme pressure." Milan felt a laugh bubble up inside him, a sound of pure, unadulterated drunken disbelief. An hour ago his life was over. Now it was better than he could have ever dreamed. He was being flown on a private jet to meet the dean of the program that held the key to his future. As he stepped into the plush, leather-appointed cabin of the Gulfstream jet, he finally allowed himself to breathe. He looked out the small oval window as the ground crew prepared for takeoff. He saw the sprawling terminal, the flashing lights of a police car near an exit, and realized with a jolt that Farley Novak was likely in the back of it, his own reversal of fortune just beginning. Novak had tried to use his power to crush a powerless teenager. Instead, he had inadvertently launched him toward his destiny. For Farley Novak, the world had shrunk to the size of a police cruiser's back seat. The familiar sights and sounds of the airport, the domain where he had wielded absolute power just an hour before, were now a blurry backdrop to his own humiliation. The handcuffs were cold and tight on his wrists. The charge sheet Captain Rostova had read to him felt like a death sentence, grand larceny, filing a false report, official misconduct. And that was just the beginning. When they searched his locker in the staff area, The case against him went from a single brazen act to a pattern of calculated corruption. Tucked away in an old lunchbox behind his spare uniform, they found a trove of stolen goods. A Rolex watch reported missing by a businessman 2 weeks prior, a pair of expensive noise-cancelling headphones, and 3 envelopes of cash totaling over $4,000, likely extorted from panicked travelers at the checkpoint under the threat of missed flights. The investigation, led by a furious Captain Rostova, rapidly expanded. They pulled Novak's entire service record. It was filled with commendations for vigilance, but also a troubling number of complaints from passengers, all of which had been dismissed by his previous supervisor as disgruntled travelers. Looking at them now through the lens of what they knew, a clear pattern of targeting and intimidation emerged. The news broke that evening. A local TV news van, tipped off by an airport employee who had witnessed the commotion, was waiting outside the Port Authority precinct. The story was irresistible. Decorated JFK security officer, accused of masterminding theft ring framing innocent teen. Novak's perp wore his face grim and his eyes downcast as he was led in handcuffs from the car to the station, was the lead story on the 10 o'clock news. The consequences cascaded. The airport authority issued a public statement expressing their outrage and launching a full-scale internal investigation into the security checkpoint's procedures and personnel. Novak's union, which would normally mount a vigorous defense, reviewed the video evidence and quietly distanced themselves, offering only the most basic legal aid. His name was now poison. His wife, a quiet woman who worked as a school librarian, saw his face on the news and collapsed. When investigators came to their modest home in Howard Beach, a search warrant in hand, they found bank statements that told a story of crushing debt. Online gambling sites, Cone Sharks, a life lived far beyond the means of a public servant. The thefts weren't just about greed, they were about desperation. Novak was a man drowning, and instead of asking for help, he had chosen to pull others down with him. The story went national. Milan Johnson's name, initially withheld because he was a minor, was eventually released with his parents' permission. He was no longer the anonymous teen, but a face and a name attached to a story of incredible injustice and resilience. Donations to a college fund, set up by his family, poured in. He became an unwilling symbol. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Milan was living a different reality. He aced his interview. He spoke about his designs with a passion and clarity that impressed the panel. When Dean Finch met with him, he didn't just ask about schematics. He asked about the airport. "The airline told us you were calm under pressure." Dean Finch said, his eyes studying Milan intently. "Tell me what was going through your mind when you were being accused." Milan thought for a moment. "Honestly, sir, I was terrified. But my dad always taught me that when things fall apart, you have to look for the one piece that doesn't make sense. I knew I didn't take it, so someone else had to. I just started looking for the piece that was out of place." The answer, so simple and yet so profound, sealed the deal. It was the answer of an engineer, a problem solver. He wasn't just offered the Chen Scholarship. He was welcomed into the Stanford family with open arms. The hard karma for Farley Novak continued its brutal, relentless descent. More victims came forward after seeing his face on the news. People who had lost valuables at his checkpoint and had been too intimidated or rushed to file a proper report. The single charge of grand larceny blossomed into a multi-count indictment. The man who had judged thousands of travelers based on a glance was now facing a mountain of evidence that judged him for who he truly was, a common thief hiding behind a badge. His lie had not just been exposed, it had been atomized, and in its place was a truth so ugly it would cost him his freedom, his family, and his future. 6 months later, the sterile chill of the airport interrogation room was a distant, almost surreal memory for Milan Johnson. His world was now the sun-drenched campus of Stanford University, a place that smelled of eucalyptus after a light rain of old paper in the hushed grandeur of the library and of the metallic tang of hot solder in the engineering lab. The oppressive beige walls of his brief confinement had been replaced by sprawling green lawns and sandstone arches that glowed gold in the late afternoon light. He belonged here. Every challenging lecture, every complex problem, set every late-night collaboration with his brilliant new friends confirmed it. The incident at JFK had not left him unscathed, but it had not broken him. Instead, it had become a strange kind of lodestar in his memory. In moments of self-doubt when the academic pressure felt immense, he would remember that cold, windowless room. He would remember the feeling of his future crumbling and the quiet, fierce resolve that had risen from the depths of his fear. He had faced down a man who held all the power and had dismantled his lies with nothing but a sharp eye and the unshakable truth. A differential equations final seemed manageable by comparison. He was on a video call with his parents, the screen of his laptop propped against a stack of textbooks. He angled the camera to show them a prototype for a self-regulating solar panel. He was designing its delicate circuits and polished cells laid out on his desk. His father, a man of few words but deep feelings, leaned into the camera, his face a mask of awe and pride. "Look at that Maria," he said to Milan's mother, who was beaming beside him. "He built that, with his mind, with his hands." He looked back at Milan, his eyes glistening. "I always knew you had it in you, son, even back there at the airport. I was 1,000 miles away, scared out of my mind for you, but I knew. You kept your head. You remembered what I told you." "It was scary, Dad." Milan admitted the honesty of the confession, a testament to the safety he felt now. "For a minute there, I thought everything was gone. The scholarship, all of it." He gestured around his dorm room, a space that was more than just a room. It was the physical embodiment of his dream. "But it wasn't," his mother chimed in, her voice soft but firm, the same tone she'd used to soothe him as a child. "Justice found a way, Milan. It can take its time, and sometimes it gets lost, but it always finds its way home eventually." That very same week, in a cavernous and somber courtroom in Queens, New York, justice was arriving at its final destination. Farley Novak stood before the judge, a hollowed-out version of the man who had once patrolled JFK with such arrogant authority. The crisp, imposing uniform was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting grey suit that seemed too cool to hang off his frame. He had lost weight, and the confident, blocky lines of his face had melted into a sagging portrait of defeat. His once cynical eyes were now empty, fixed on a point on the floor, as if the weight of everyone's gaze was too much to bear. He had taken a plea bargain. The evidence against him was an avalanche, the high-definition video, the testimony from Sarah Jenkins, the trove of stolen goods from his locker, and the half-dozen other victims who had come forward after his arrest. A trial would have been a prolonged public crucifixion. Before the sentence was handed down, he was permitted to make a statement. He shuffled some papers, and in a mumbled, monotone voice that barely reached the back of the room, offered a perfunctory apology. He spoke of crushing debt, of making a series of terrible mistakes, and he mentioned Milan Johnson by name, a name he spat out as if it were a piece of grit in his mouth. There was no remorse in his voice, only the flat, bitter resentment of a man who had been caught. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for sharp insight, listened impassively. When Novak was finished, she peered down at him over her glasses, her silence more damning than any outburst. "A series of mistakes, Mr. Novak," she began, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom. "A mistake is taking the wrong exit on the highway. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill on time. What you did was not a mistake. It was a calculated campaign of predatory theft carried out under the color of law. You didn't just steal property." She continued, her voice rising with cold fury. "You stole something far more valuable. You stole the public's trust. You used a position of authority meant to protect citizens to prey on them. And in your most despicable act, you chose to ruin a young man's future to cover your crimes. You tried to sacrifice his dream on the altar of your own greed and desperation." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The fact that you failed is a testament to his remarkable character and composure, not a credit to yours. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore and the oath you swore to uphold." The sentence was delivered without ceremony. 7 years in state prison. A gasp rippled through the gallery. For Farley Novak, the sound was the final slamming door on his life as he knew it. The echoes of the incident reverberated far beyond the courtroom. The Port Authority, humiliated by the scandal, launched a sweeping internal investigation. Captain Eva Rostova, whose unwavering integrity had been instrumental in exposing Novak, was promoted to deputy inspector and placed in charge of implementing the changes. A new protocol, unofficially nicknamed the Novak Rule by agents in the terminal, was now standard procedure. Any passenger detention, based on an officer's word against theirs, required an immediate mandatory review of all relevant security footage by a supervisor before any further action could be taken. A small, simple change born from a great injustice. Milan's life and Novak's, which had crossed for less than a single volatile hour, were now set on irrevocably divergent paths. Novak's path led to a world of concrete and steel, a place where his authority was a forgotten memory, and his name a permanent synonym for disgrace. His karma was not a lightning strike, but a long, slow, grinding sentence, a daily payment for the trust he had shattered. Milan's path led ever upward toward a horizon of limitless possibility. He excelled in his studies, the fire of his intellect now stoked by the world's best resources. The incident at JFK had become a part of his story, not as a source of trauma, but as a crucible that had tested his mettle and revealed a strength he never knew he possessed. He had learned with a certainty few people his age ever attain that life's fragility was matched only by the resilience of the human spirit. The glint of light he had spotted in the chaos of the airport, that tiny fleeting spark, had done more than just reveal a thief. It had been the flashpoint that illuminated the truth, cleared his path, and became the first brilliant reflection of a future that now shone brighter than any diamond. Milan Johnson's story is a powerful and sobering reminder that in an instant our lives can be turned upside down by the prejudice and corruption of those in power. His dream was nearly extinguished by a lie, but his courage, his sharp eye, and his refusal to be broken turned a nightmare into an extraordinary victory. This wasn't just about a stolen bracelet. It was about the fight for truth in a world that is too often quick to judge. Farley Novak's spectacular downfall shows us that karma, though sometimes delayed, is often brutally precise. The same system he used as a weapon became the instrument of his own undoing, proving that no lie can withstand the glare of the unblinking truth. If you were moved by Milan's incredible story of resilience and the satisfying dose of justice that followed, please take a moment to hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with others who need to hear that standing up for the truth, even when you're terrified, can change everything. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss another story of injustice defeated and karma served. Thank you for listening.